Commander Jake Holloway was not what anyone would call a traditional diplomat. He'd been chosen for this assignment specifically because he had what Earth's diplomatic corps called plausible deniability of competence. In other words, he could play dumb really, really well. The Galactic Council chamber looked like someone had designed it after taking too many drugs and reading too much philosophy. Floating platforms, ambient lighting that somehow came from nowhere and everywhere, and enough pompous architecture to make a cathedral jealous. Seated across from Jake was Ambassador Thrennick of the Valorian Collective, a four-armed, blue-skinned bureaucrat whose species had perfected the art of looking down on people even when sitting at the same height. Thrennick adjusted all four pairs of his reading glasses simultaneously, which was both impressive and deeply irritating. Commander Holloway, the Galactic Council has prepared what we believe to be a most equitable peace treaty regarding the disputed Kronos border zone. Oh boy, I love equity, Jake said, grinning like someone who'd just been told they won a free timeshare presentation. Thrennick's eyebrow, the third one, twitched. Yes. Well, the terms are quite simple. Both human and galactic forces will maintain presence in the zone, but to prevent escalation, we are implementing strict weapons restrictions. Restrictions, sure. Love those. Specifically, Thrennick continued, his voice dripping with the satisfaction of someone who thought they'd just won chess in 3 moves. Neither side may deploy advanced weapons within the zone. We define advanced weapons as any armament utilizing energy propulsion, chemical explosives, or electromagnetic acceleration. The other council members, a collection of various tentacled, scaled, and crystalline beings, nodded sagely. They'd spent 6 months crafting this language. It was airtight. It was brilliant. It would finally put those aggressive humans in their place. Jake read through the document, his lips moving slightly like he was sounding out big words. In reality, he was doing mental calculations and trying not to laugh. So no guns, no missiles, no railguns, no plasma weapons, nothing that goes boom or pew-pew. Correct, Thrennick said, leaning back with satisfaction. Only primitive armaments will be permitted. We assumed this would be acceptable since humans claim to value peace. Oh, we value peace, Jake said, reaching for the digital signature pad. We value it so much, I'm gonna sign this right now before you change your mind. He scribbled his signature with the enthusiasm of a kid who just got permission to skip homework. The holographic document flashed green, transmitting instantly to Earth and every Galactic Council database. Thrennick's satisfied expression wavered. In his 70 years of diplomatic service, he'd never seen anyone sign a treaty that fast. Humans were supposed to argue, negotiate, demand concessions. They were supposed to whine about the restrictions. You have no objections? Thrennick asked slowly. No clarifications needed? Nope. Crystal clear. No advanced weapons. Primitive stuff only. Got it. We'll see you at the border in 2 weeks. Jake stood up, still grinning, and walked out of the chamber while the council members exchanged confused glances. Thrennick reviewed the treaty again, checking every clause, every definition, every semicolon. It was perfect. It was unbreakable. So why did he suddenly feel like he'd just made a terrible mistake? Back on his shuttle, Jake activated his secure comm link. Lieutenant Rodriguez, you can start hitting up the museums. On the other end, Lieutenant Eva Rodriguez's laugh was downright villainous. Oh, this is gonna be fun. Lieutenant Eva Rodriguez stood in front of a whiteboard in Earth's Strategic Command, surrounded by what had to be the most unusual military briefing team ever assembled. There were engineers, yes, but also museum curators, historical weapons experts, a guy who ran a Renaissance fair, and someone who'd won the International Medieval Combat Championship 3 years running. All right, people, listen up, Eva said, tapping the whiteboard with a marker. We have 2 weeks to arm an entire expeditionary force with weapons that predate gunpowder. The Galactic Council thinks they've neutered us. Let's educate them on why humans kept perfecting murder techniques for 10,000 years. Dmitry Volkov, the team's lead engineer and a man who looked like he could bench press a truck, raised his hand. I've already contacted every medieval weapons manufacturer in Europe. Crossbow makers, bowyers, the whole deal. They think it's for the largest LARP event in history. Ava said, "What's our inventory looking like?" Well, Dmitry pulled up a holographic display. We've got 12,000 longbows being produced. English U, modern composite materials that still technically count as wood, and enough arrows to blot out a small sun. We've also got heavy crossbows, arbalists, and these beautiful Chinese repeating crossbows that can shoot 10 bolts in 15 seconds. I'm in love, Eva said. What else? A curator from the British Museum, a prim woman named Helen, adjusted her glasses. We've secured blueprints for historically accurate trebuchets, the Warwolf-class models that Edward I used to reduce castles to rubble. We can launch a 200-pound projectile over 300 meters. Now we're talking. Dimitri, can we make them better? Dimitri's grin was absolutely feral. I've been waiting for you to ask. See, the treaty says no chemical explosives or energy weapons. Says nothing about kinetic energy optimization, counterweight efficiency, or aerodynamic projectile design. I'm thinking we take a 13th century trebuchet and give it a 26th century engineering degree. The Renaissance Fair coordinator, a bearded man named Doug, spoke up. I can get you ballistas. Full-size, siege weapon ballistas. The kind that can punch a 6-foot bolt through a stone wall. I've got a whole community of enthusiasts who'll build them for free just to see them used. Eva nodded appreciatively. What about training? Already handled, said the medieval combat champion, a woman named Patricia. Turns out we've got about 50,000 people worldwide who practice historical combat sports. Archery clubs, jousting leagues, SCA members. They're actually excited to show aliens what primitive means to humans. Beautiful. Logistics? Dimitri pulled up another display. We're retrofitting cargo haulers to transport everything. The aliens will scan our ships, see wood, rope, and metal, all non-powered, all perfectly legal. They won't even know what they're looking at. Eva walked along the whiteboard, writing in broad strokes. Longbows, crossbows, trebuchets, ballistas, catapults. Every weapon humanity had invented before someone discovered that sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter made things go boom. You know what the best part is? She said, turning back to the team. The Galactic Council thinks we're primitive because we still have these weapons. They don't understand that we kept them because we thought they were cool. Because we never throw away a perfectly good way to hurt someone from a distance. Helen from the British Museum raised her hand timidly. I should mention that several museums are refusing to give up their collections. They're quite attached to their medieval weaponry. That's fine, Eva said. We're not taking museum pieces into combat anyway. We're building new ones, better ones. Museum-quality replicas, built by people who've spent their entire lives obsessing over how to make a better crossbow. Dimitri was already sketching on a tablet. I'm thinking we add some stabilization to the trebuchet arms. Nothing powered, just better engineering. And the projectiles, well, I want to get creative. I like where your head's at. Okay, people, we've got 2 weeks to turn human history into the galaxy's worst surprise. Museums, workshops, blacksmiths, anyone who's ever thought medieval weapons were neat, get them on board. I want enough arrows to make Agincourt look like a warm-up. The team dispersed with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for people who just got told their hobby was now their job. All across Earth, forges fired up, workshops buzzed to life, and thousands of history enthusiasts realized their childhood dreams were about to become very, very real. Meanwhile, on the Galactic Council flagship, Thrennick reviewed the treaty for the 18th time, still trying to figure out what he'd missed. He'd find out soon enough. The Kronos border zone was exactly the kind of disputed territory that made diplomats rich and soldiers nervous. A resource-rich asteroid field on the edge of Council space, valuable enough to fight over but not valuable enough to start a real war. At least, that's what everyone thought before humans got involved. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel with all the subtlety of a marching band. 15 cargo haulers, 3 cruisers for show, and enough shuttles to transport what looked like half of Earth's military. Thrennick watched from his observation deck as the ships took up position, his forearms crossed in what he hoped looked like confident authority rather than mounting dread. "They're here," announced Kragthar, the war chief of the Kragthar Dominion. His species looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a tank and given it anger management issues. He was holding what the Council classified as a primitive weapon, a plasma spear that merely superheated its blade to a few thousand degrees without using banned propulsion systems. This should be entertaining. Humans with sticks and stones. Thrennick wasn't so sure. Something about Commander Holloway's smile 2 weeks ago had haunted his dreams. Literally. He'd woken up, 3 times in a cold sweat. They're requesting permission to land ground forces, his aide reported. Grant it, and prepare the inspection team. I want to verify every single weapon they've brought. The human landing was organized chaos. Shuttles descended in waves, disgorging soldiers in what looked like riot gear mixed with historical reenactment costumes. But it was the cargo that made Thrennick's blood run cold, assuming his species had blood in the traditional sense. Wooden siege engines. Enormous wooden siege engines. What in the 17 hells is that? Kragthar rumbled, pointing at a structure being assembled on the ridge. "That," said Commander Holloway, who'd appeared beside them without anyone noticing, "is a trebuchet, 13th century French design. Well, mostly 13th century. We made a few improvements. You know, better math, tighter engineering tolerances, materials science, the usual." Thrennick activated his translation implant 3 times to make sure it was working. "You brought a medieval siege weapon to a border dispute?" "Oh, we brought several. That's just the Warwolf class. We've got smaller ones for precision work." Lieutenant Eva Rodriguez walked up, carrying a tablet and wearing a smile that could cut glass. "Ambassador Thrennick, perfect timing. You wanted to inspect our weapons for treaty compliance." Yes, that is exactly what I want." "Fantastic. Right this way." The inspection tour was the most surreal experience of Thrennick's 70-year diplomatic career, and he'd once mediated a trade dispute between methane breathers and plasma beings. Eva walked him through the human encampment with the pride of someone showing off a new house. "Here we have our longbow division. 6-foot English longbows made from yew, bamboo, and modern composite materials. Draw a weight of about 150 pounds. Arrows are carbon fiber and titanium, but that's just smart metallurgy, not banned technology." Thrennick watched a human woman draw one of the bows. The weapon bent into an alarming curve, and she loosed an arrow that buried itself 3 inches into a target 200 meters away. The sound it made was deeply unpleasant. Moving on, we have the crossbow sections. These beauties can punch through most personal armor, completely mechanical, just very, very well-designed mechanisms. Springs, levers, and tension. Newton would be proud. A crossbow fired nearby. The bolt moved so fast it was barely visible. It hit a test plate made of the same material as council armor. The bolt went through it. "That shouldn't be possible," Thrennick muttered. "Oh, it's very possible. Crossbows were designed to kill heavily armored knights. Your ion shields are calibrated for energy weapons, not solid projectiles moving at terminal velocity." Cragthar had joined the inspection, and his expression had shifted from amused condescension to something approaching concern. "These are primitive weapons?" "Ancient technology," Eva confirmed cheerfully. "Now, if you'll follow me, we have the really fun stuff." She led them to the ridge where the trebuchet now stood fully assembled. A towering wooden structure that looked like it could reduce a building to powder. Dmitry Volkov was there, running calculations on a tablet while 3 other engineers adjusted counterweights. "Dmitry, we have guests," Eva announced. Dmitry looked up and waved. "Ambassador Thrennick, War Chief Cragthar, want to see what 900 years of engineering improvements can do to a gravity-powered projectile launcher?" "I'm not sure I do," Thrennick admitted. "Too bad. Fire one." The trebuchet's arm swung with a sound like the world's angriest tree branch. A 200-pound stone sailed through the air in a perfect arc and landed precisely on a marker 320 meters away. The impact crater was significant. "Kinetic energy," Dmitry said proudly. "Just mass, gravity, and really good engineering. We can drop one of these. Projectiles through a ship's hull if we want. No explosives needed, just physics and spite." Thrennick pulled out his copy of the treaty and read it again. "Energy propulsion, no. Chemical explosives, no. Electromagnetic acceleration, no. Just mechanical advantage. Springs, tension, gravity, and apparently several hundred years of humans figuring out how to make wood and string absolutely terrifying." "This is legal?" Cragthar asked quietly. "Completely," Eva said. "We checked, 3 times. With lawyers." Junior diplomat Lila Park appeared, carrying an actual scroll. She was young, enthusiastic, and had the kind of smile that suggested she knew exactly how much chaos she was enabling. "Ambassador Thrennick, I've prepared a complete technical specification document for every weapon system we've deployed. As you can see, everything predates the invention of gunpowder. The longbow was used at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. The trebuchet saw action in the siege of Stirling Castle in 1304. The crossbow was actually banned by the Pope in 1139 because it was too effective against Christian soldiers, though that didn't stop anyone from using it. "You prepared a historical reference guide for your weapons?" Thrennick asked weakly. "We wanted to be thorough. Also, there's a fun section on how humans used these weapons to kill each other for about 3,000 years before we invented anything the treaty actually banned." Thrennick looked around the human encampment. Soldiers in armor, bows and crossbows stacked like rifles, trebuchets and ballistas positioned like artillery. Thousands of humans who looked absolutely thrilled to be there. "Commander Holloway," Thrennick said slowly, "when you signed that treaty, you knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" Jake's grin was radiant. "Ambassador, I have no idea what you're talking about. We're just simple humans following the rules. Isn't that what you wanted? Somewhere in the distance, another trebuchet fired. The sound echoed across the border zone like thunder. Thrennick finally understood why Holloway had been smiling. Humans were absolutely terrifying. The border zone had been quiet for exactly 6 hours before the Kragthar decided to test the humans. In Kragthar culture, 6 hours of peace was considered an extended ceasefire. War Chief Kragthar figured that if humans were really just armed with wooden toys, now was the time to establish dominance. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating humans. It started with a probe. 3 Kragthar warriors in heavy combat armor, carrying plasma spears and ion shields, approached the human perimeter. They weren't trying to be subtle. Subtlety wasn't really a Kragthar thing. Humans, the lead warrior bellowed, your primitive weapons are no match for Kragthar might. Withdraw from this sector, or face consequences. Commander Holloway, who was drinking coffee and watching the whole thing from a command post, activated his comm. Eva, we've got some visitors who want a demonstration. Range? 80 meters in closing, Eva replied. Well, within effective range for, literally everything we brought. Let's start with something proportional. Longbow Division, you're up. On the ridge above the Kragthar warriors, 20 human archers stood up. They'd been sitting there the whole time, which should have been the Kragthar's first hint that this wasn't going to go well. Each archer held a 6-foot longbow that looked like it had been carved from a tree, and strung with the cord of divine wrath. The lead Kragthar warrior activated his ion shield. It shimmered to life, a field of energy designed to deflect plasma bolts and laser fire. He was completely confident. After all, what could wooden arrows do? Knock, called the archery commander, a woman named Officer Kelly Chang who'd been teaching medieval combat techniques for 15 years and had been waiting her entire life for this moment. 20 arrows were set to bowstrings. Draw. 20 bows bent into curves that looked structurally impossible. The archers were pulling 150 pounds of draw weight like it was nothing. Genetic enhancement, training, and pure human stubbornness made them into medieval killing machines. Loose. 20 arrows flew. The sound was like angry hornets mixed with incoming death. The arrows covered 80 meters in less than 2 seconds. The Kragthar warrior's ion shield did exactly nothing, because ion shields were designed for energy weapons, not solid projectiles moving at 200 feet per second. 19 arrows hit armor with the impact of sledgehammers. One arrow found a gap between the armor plates and buried itself 3 inches into the warrior's shoulder. He went down screaming. Hold fire, Kelly commanded. I think they got the message. The 2 remaining Kragthar warriors dragged their companion back, moving faster than anyone had ever seen a Kragthar move. Behind human lines, the archers were already knocking fresh arrows. The message was clear. That was a warning shot, and we've got thousands more where that came from. Thrennick, watching from his observation post, felt something like nausea. Or maybe it was respect, possibly terror. The emotions were getting jumbled. They shot through an ion shield with arrows. Technically, Lila Park said, appearing beside him with her scroll and her inexhaustible cheerfulness. Arrows aren't energy, so ion shields don't deflect them. It's a common misconception that defensive technology adapts to all threats. Human medieval warfare actually has extensive documentation on defeating various types of armor, which is why we developed so many different projectile weapons. Stop helping, Thrennick muttered. War Chief Kragthar was less philosophical about the situation. He was furious. His warriors had been embarrassed by primitives with wooden weapons. This could not stand. He ordered a full assault. 50 Kragthar warriors, all in heavy armor, all carrying advanced melee weapons that technically complied with the treaty. It was the dumbest decision he'd ever made. Incoming assault force, Eva reported, watching the Kragthar charge across the open ground. They're not even using cover. It's like they want to die. Crossbow divisions, fire at will, Holloway ordered. Dimitri, warm up Trebuchet 3. I want a demonstration of kinetic diplomacy. The crossbow teams opened fire first. Unlike longbows, which required significant skill and strength, crossbows were point-and-click adventures in sudden ventilation. The bolts were longer, heavier, and moved even faster than arrows. They punched through Kragthar armor like it was tissue paper. A Kragthar warrior's chestplate, rated to withstand plasma fire, developed a fist-sized hole. The warrior looked down at it in confusion before collapsing. Another took a bolt through the thigh. A third caught one in the shoulder that spun him completely around. They're still coming, Eva observed. Kragthar are stubborn. Then let's educate them on medieval siege warfare. Dimitri, you're cleared hot. Dimitri had been waiting for this moment. He'd spent 2 weeks optimizing a weapon system that was old when gunpowder was new, and he was ready to show the galaxy what happened when you gave humans time, resources, and a really stupid challenge. Trebuchet 3, loaded and ranged, he reported. Projectile is 200 pounds of aerodynamically shaped concrete. We're calling this one the attitude adjuster. Fire. The trebuchet's counterweight dropped. The arm swung up with mechanical precision. 200 pounds of concrete, shaped like an oversized lawn dart, arced through the air in a ballistic curve that would make a mathematician weep with joy. It landed 20 meters in front of the Kragthar assault force. The impact crater was 6 feet wide and 3 feet deep. Dust and debris exploded outward. The shockwave knocked 3 warriors off their feet. The remaining Kragthar stopped dead, staring at the crater, then at the trebuchet, then at each other. That was the warning shot, Holloway announced over open comms. The next one lands on target. This is what humans used to do to castles. Imagine what it does to flesh and blood. The Kragthar assault force retreated, not in an organized tactical withdrawal, but in a full-blown rout. They'd come expecting to fight primitives and found themselves on the receiving end of weapons that humans had been perfecting for 1,000 years before the Galactic Council even existed. Thrennick watched the retreat through his viewing screen, then pulled up the treaty again. He read every word, every definition, every clause. Nowhere did it say anything about kinetic energy limits. Nowhere did it specify how effective primitive weapons could be. The Council had defined advanced by technology level, not by lethality. Commander Holloway, Thrennick said over the comm channel, his voice carefully controlled. I believe we need to discuss rules of engagement. Absolutely, Jake replied, still sipping his coffee. We're happy to follow any rules, as long as they're clearly defined, in writing, with no loopholes. You know, like the treaty we already signed. From the ridge, another trebuchet fired. This one launched its payload high and far, a demonstration shot that sailed over the border zone and landed in empty space. The message was clear. We can hit anything, anywhere, and we're just getting started. Lila Park updated her scroll with careful notes. I'm documenting all engagements for the historical record. I think future diplomatic courses will find this very educational. Thrennick couldn't argue with that. He was learning more about humans in 1 day than in 10 years of diplomatic contact. The primary lesson being, never, ever try to outsmart a species that weaponizes nostalgia. War Chief Kragthar was having what humans would call a very bad day. His shoulder still ached where a human medic had removed the arrow, which the medic had cheerfully offered to let him keep as a souvenir. His pride hurt worse than the wound. He'd been humiliated by primitives with wooden weapons, and in Kragthar culture, humiliation had only one remedy: overwhelming force. We attack at dawn, he announced to his commanders. All forces, we will crush these humans and their ridiculous toys. One of his sub-commanders, a younger warrior named Grath, who'd actually been paying attention, raised a claw hesitantly. War Chief, perhaps we should reconsider. Those wooden toys punched through our best armor. Then we bring more armor, more warriors, more weapons. The Council has given us plasma spears and ion blades. We have the advantage of superior technology. Respectfully, War Chief, I don't think the humans care about our technology. Kragthar silenced him with a glare. The attack would proceed. On the human side, Commander Holloway was eating breakfast and watching the Kragthar marshal their forces through drone surveillance. Eva sat across from him, also eating, also watching. Neither seemed particularly concerned. They're bringing everything, Eva observed. I count 200 warriors, full armor, heavy weapons. They're even bringing those siege towers they've been building. How nice. They're trying to play our game. Jake took a bite of reconstituted eggs that tasted like cardboard but had excellent nutritional value. What's our status? All siege weapons operational. Longbow and crossbow divisions at full readiness. Dmitri has been up all night preparing special ammunition for the trebuchets. He won't tell me what it is, but he keeps giggling, which is concerning. Let him have his fun. We've got about an hour before they attack. Make sure everyone knows the rules of engagement. Proportional response. Minimize casualties. Maximum embarrassment. Got it. Hurt their pride more than their bodies. Exactly. We're trying to make a definite point, not start a genocide. 58 minutes later, the Kragthar attacked. They came in waves, which was actually smart tactical thinking. The first wave carried heavy shields, designed to absorb impacts. The second wave pushed siege towers, tall wooden structures that the Kragthar had apparently built to match human medieval tactics. The third wave consisted of their heavy assault troops, the biggest and meanest warriors they had. It was impressive. It was organized. It was also exactly what the humans had been preparing for since the invention of siege warfare. "Here we go," Holloway said, activating the tactical channel. "All units, weapons free. Show them what happens when you bring a plasma spear to a trebuchet fight." The longbow divisions opened up first, 200 archers, arranged in staggered lines, like they were recreating Agincourt, loosed volley after volley into the sky. The arrows arced high, then fell like deadly rain onto the Kragthar assault force. The aliens' shields caught some, their armor deflected others, but enough got through to turn the advance into chaos. Warriors stumbled, fell, tried to maintain formation, while arrows kept falling. "Crossbow teams, target the siege towers," Eva commanded. The heavy crossbows swiveled on their mechanical mounts. These weren't the handheld versions but full siege crossbows, mounted weapons that required cranks to reload and launched bolts the size of javelins. They fired with mechanical precision, each bolt punching through the wooden siege towers like they were made of balsa wood. One tower collapsed entirely. Another caught fire somehow, even though the bolts were just metal and wood. "How did that catch fire?" Thrennick demanded from his observation post. Lila Park consulted her tablet. "I believe the crossbow team attached incendiary materials to that particular bolt. Technically not a chemical explosive, just flammable substances that ignite on impact through friction. There's historical precedent from the Byzantine Empire's use of Greek fire." "That's cheating. That's human history. We've been finding creative ways to set things on fire for 10,000 years. The Kragthar pushed forward despite the casualties, which Kragthar did because retreating was considered worse than death. They reached the base of the human defensive position, where the real fun began. "Ballista teams, you're up," Holloway ordered. The ballistas were monsters, essentially giant crossbows mounted on reinforced frames. They fired 6-foot bolts with enough force to punch through starship hulls, if given the chance. Against Kragthar warriors in armor, they were hilariously overpowered. The first ballista bolt hit a Kragthar warrior center mass. The warrior, his armor, and his dignity all ceased to exist in the same moment. The bolt kept going, passing through 2 more warriors behind him before embedding itself in the ground. The impact knocked a dozen warriors off their feet from sheer shockwave alone. "Did we just kebab 3 aliens with 1 shot?" Eva asked. "Technically, yes," confirmed the ballista team leader. "That was not intentional. These things have more penetration than we calculated." "Well, dial it back. We're trying not to commit war crimes, even accidental ones." The Kragthar were learning that medieval siege weapons weren't just effective, they were terrifying. Arrows that fell like rain, crossbow bolts that punched through anything, ballista bolts that treated armor like suggestions, and they hadn't even seen what Dmitri had prepared. "Trebuchet teams commence fire mission," Holloway said calmly. "Special ammunition authorized." Dimitri's voice came over the comm, and he sounded absolutely delighted. "Trebuchet 1 through 6, loaded with specialty payloads. Ranging calculations complete. Firing in sequence." The first trebuchet launched its payload with that distinctive sound of doom, but instead of a solid stone, it launched a container that burst open, mid-flight, scattering hundreds of smaller projectiles across the battlefield. The Kragthar looked up just in time to see what humans called a cluster bomb, but which was technically just a bunch of rocks in a breakable container. No explosives, just gravity, physics, and spite. The second trebuchet fired what appeared to be a solid shot. It landed in front of the Kragthar lines and shattered, releasing a cloud of fine powder that turned out to be extremely slippery. Dozens of warriors lost their footing, sliding and tumbling like they were on ice. Later analysis would show it was just soap and lubricants, nothing banned by the treaty. The third trebuchet launched a payload that made a sound like a scream as it flew. The Kragthar assault hesitated, looking up in confusion and growing fear. The projectile landed and released nothing but noise, a psychological weapon designed to sound like incoming death. It was just carved wood with air channels, but it worked beautifully. Trebuchets 4, 5, and 6 fired traditional stone projectiles, but with one difference. Dmitri had shaped them for optimal aerodynamics. They flew farther, faster, and hit harder than any medieval trebuchet had ever managed. The impact craters were perfect circles. The message was clear. We're not just using old weapons, we're making them better. The Kragthar assault broke, not because they were cowards, but because there was no tactical advantage in charging into what amounted to medieval artillery with modern precision. Warriors retreated in small groups, dragging wounded comrades, their siege towers abandoned and burning. War Chief Kragthar stood on a ridge, watching his assault force fall apart, and felt something he'd never experienced before: doubt. These humans, with their primitive weapons, had just shredded a coordinated assault by superior numbers and supposedly superior technology. They'd done it without energy weapons, without explosives, without anything the treaty banned. They'd done it with wood, string, and engineering that was old when his species was still figuring out fire. Thrennick watched the retreat through his viewing screen and then did something unprecedented. He initiated an emergency session of the Galactic Council. All 11 member species appeared as holograms in his command center within minutes. "I'm calling a formal objection to human weapon systems," Thrennick announced without preamble. The council representatives looked confused. The Vixian ambassador, a crystalline being that communicated through light pulses, flickered a question. "On what grounds?" "Our intelligence confirms they are in full compliance with the treaty. They're using siege weapons, medieval siege weapons, weapons that are thousands of years old by their own historical record." "And the treaty banned what, specifically?" asked the Torvan representative, a floating jellyfish-like creature. Thrennick pulled up the treaty language, the same words he'd been so proud of 2 weeks ago. "Advanced weapons utilizing energy propulsion, chemical explosives, or electromagnetic acceleration." So, the humans are using mechanical weapons. Springs, levers, gravity, tension, all clearly not covered by the treaty language. They're launching 200-pound stones 300 meters with pinpoint accuracy. Which is physics, not banned technology. They're shooting arrows through ion shields. Ion shields defend against energy weapons, not solid projectiles. That's not a treaty violation, that's a design limitation. Thrennick felt his careful diplomatic composure cracking. They're winning a military engagement with weapons that predate their industrial revolution. The council was silent for a moment. Then the Vixian ambassador flickered again, and the translation came through. "Perhaps we should have been more specific in the treaty language." "Perhaps," Thrennick said bitterly. "We should have asked humans what they meant by primitive weapons before we assumed we knew." On the human side, Jake finished his now cold breakfast and watched the council's emergency session through intercepted communications. Lila Park sat beside him, updating her historical documentation. "Do you think they'll try to renegotiate?" she asked. "Probably. They're realizing that humans are the only species in the galaxy who kept perfecting weapons we didn't need anymore, just because we thought they were cool. And because we might need them someday," Eva added, joining them. "And because we might need them someday," Jake agreed. "Never throw away a perfectly good way to hurt someone from a distance. That's basically humanity's motto." Dimitri appeared on the comm screen, still at his trebuchet. "Commander, I've been thinking. If we angled the trajectory differently and increased the counterweight by 15%, we could probably hit targets in low orbit." "Dimitri, no. Dimitri, yes. I'm running the calculations now." Jake sighed. This was going to be a long deployment. But as he watched the Kragthar forces retreat and the Galactic Council argue about treaty semantics, he couldn't help but smile. Humans had done it again, turned everyone's expectations upside down, followed the rules exactly as written, and proven that primitive was just another word for underestimated. The Galactic Council was learning a valuable lesson. When dealing with humans, never assume you know what they're capable of, especially when you give them a challenge and a loophole. The emergency Galactic Council session had been going for 3 hours, which was approximately 2 hours and 59 minutes longer than Thrennick's patience could handle. Representatives from 11 species argued, debated, and generally accomplished nothing while humans sat in the Kronos border zone, with enough medieval weaponry to lay siege to a small planet. "We must renegotiate the treaty," Thrennick insisted for what felt like the 100th time. "The current terms are clearly inadequate." "On what grounds?" The Torvan representative's translated voice dripped with skepticism. "The humans have violated nothing. They followed the letter of the law. They followed the letter while completely ignoring the spirit. The spirit of law is not enforceable. The letter is. Unless you'd like to explain to the Galactic Court why we're punishing a species for being too creative within legal boundaries." Thrennick knew he was beaten, but he wasn't ready to admit it. "Then we expand the treaty. We ban kinetic weapons, mechanical weapons, anything that can be used offensively." The Vixian ambassador flickered in what translated as amusement. "And how exactly do you define that? Rocks. Humans could throw rocks. Sticks? They've been using sticks as weapons for millions of years. At what point does a tool become a weapon?" "When humans are holding it," Thrennick muttered. "I move that we invite Commander Holloway to this session," announced the Delphian representative, a species known for their diplomatic pragmatism. Clearly, humans understand something about warfare that we don't. Perhaps we should ask instead of assume. The motion passed, mostly because everyone was curious to see what Holloway would say. 15 minutes later, Jake appeared as a hologram in the council chamber, still holding his coffee mug. Eva and Lila flanked him, both trying not to smile. Behind them, visible through the command post window, a trebuchet fired another practice shot. The timing was probably coincidental. Probably. Gentlemen, ladies, sentient crystalline structures, and assorted other beings, Jake said pleasantly. You wanted to chat? Thrennick leaned forward with all four arms on the table. Commander Holloway, the Council wishes to discuss the possibility of treaty renegotiation. Sure. What did you have in mind? We propose expanding the banned weapons list to include all kinetic projectile weapons, all mechanical advantage weapons, and all siege equipment. Jake took a sip of coffee and pretended to think about it. So you want to ban rocks, sticks, and anything humans can throw or swing? If necessary, yes. Interesting. Counterproposal. No. The council chamber fell silent. Several representatives looked at each other in confusion. The Torvan ambassador spoke up. You're refusing to negotiate? I'm refusing to negotiate away our right to defend ourselves with weapons you already agreed were acceptable. We signed your treaty. We followed your rules. We brought exactly what you said we could bring. If you don't like the results, that's a you problem, not a we problem. Thrennick's face, or at least the part of his anatomy that served the same function, turned a darker shade of blue. You're being unreasonable. Am I? Let me walk you through this. You wrote a treaty banning advanced weapons. You defined advanced as anything using energy, explosives, or electromagnetic systems. We complied. We brought mechanical weapons. You know why we have mechanical weapons? Because we never threw them away. Lila stepped forward with her scroll, which had grown considerably over the past few days. The Galactic Council represents species that rapidly advance and discard old technology. Once you developed energy weapons, you recycled your projectile weapons. Once you had gravitic propulsion, you forgot about mechanical systems. You assumed advancement meant abandonment. Humans don't abandon things, Eva added. We keep them. We study them. We practice with them. We have entire communities of people who spend their free time learning how to use weapons that were obsolete 1,000 years ago, just because they think it's cool. Jake set down his coffee mug. You know what the really funny part is? We tried to warn you. I sat in that chamber 2 weeks ago, practically giggling, and you didn't ask a single question. You were so confident you'd outsmarted us that you didn't stop to wonder why we were happy about the restrictions. Because you're insane, Kragthar rumbled from his seat. Your entire species is certifiably insane. Maybe. But we're insane within the bounds of your treaty, which makes it your problem. Jake leaned back. Here's the reality, folks. Humans have been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We've been perfecting the art of hurting each other from a distance for 10,000 years. We invented bows, crossbows, catapults, trebuchets, ballistas, and about 600 other ways to launch objects at high velocity using nothing but mechanical advantage. Then we invented guns and missiles and all that fun stuff. But we kept the old weapons because we're sentimental like that. And nostalgic, Eva interjected. Don't forget nostalgic. Very nostalgic. We have museums full of weapons. We have competitions. We have people who build trebuchets in their backyards for fun. You handed us a treaty that banned modern weapons and said we could use primitive ones, and we thought, perfect. Finally an excuse to break out the good stuff from the medieval period. Lila pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's military museums, Renaissance fairs, archery competitions, and historical combat societies. This is what humans do with obsolete weapons technology. We preserve it. We celebrate it. We teach our children about it. We never, ever forget how to use it. The council members stared at the images. Thousands of humans in armor, shooting bows, operating siege weapons, all doing it recreationally. For fun. Because they wanted to. The Delphian representative broke the silence. You're telling us that humans maintain combat proficiency with obsolete weapons as a hobby? As multiple hobbies, Jake corrected. Archery, historical fencing, siege weapon enthusiast clubs, medieval combat leagues. We have people who forge swords by hand using 15th century techniques. We have engineers who spend years building historically accurate trebuchets and then improve them because, why not? We're really weird about our weapons history. Thrennick slumped in his chair, looking defeated. This is unprecedented. Welcome to humanity. We're the species that weaponizes literally everything, including nostalgia, historical accuracy, and loopholes in poorly written treaties. There was a long pause. Finally, the Vixian ambassador flickered a question. What would it take for you to agree to peaceful coexistence in the Kronos border zone? Oh, that's easy, Jake said with a genuine smile. Recognize that the zone is shared territory. Both sides maintain presence. Both sides respect boundaries. Both sides don't try to outsmart each other with cute treaty language. And if there are future disputes? The Torvin asked. We talk like adults. Novel concept, I know. Jake glanced at Eva and Lila, who both nodded. Look, we don't want a war. We just want you to understand that humans aren't going to be pushed around by species who think they're smarter than us. We might use old weapons, but we use them very, very well. The Council deliberated for exactly 90 seconds before the Delphian representative spoke. The Galactic Council accepts your terms. The Kronos border zone will be jointly administered. Both human and Council forces will maintain presence under the existing treaty, which will not be revised. Excellent, Jake said. I'll have our diplomatic team draft the formal agreement. Lila, you want to handle that? Lila's smile was radiant. I'll include extensive footnotes about historical weapons development, for educational purposes. Please don't, Thrennick pleaded weakly. Too late, already started. As the council session ended and holograms blinked out, Jake turned to Eva. Think they learned their lesson? Maybe. Though I heard Thrennick muttering something about banning kinetic weapons in the next treaty. From the window, they could see Dimitri at his trebuchet, taking notes. Jake grinned. Let them try. We've got swords, spears, maces, warhammers, morning stars, and a whole arsenal of pointy things that predate metal smelting. If they ban kinetic weapons, we'll just get creative with sharp objects. You're enjoying this way too much. I'm enjoying this exactly the right amount. We got to use trebuchets in an actual military engagement. Do you know how many military historians are going to write papers about this? We're living the dream, Eva. Lila looked up from her scroll. I'm titling my official report, The Kronos Incident, a case study in why specificity matters in treaty language. Catchy. Add a subtitle, or how humans weaponized medieval warfare and made it everyone's problem. Outside, the sun was setting over the Kronos border zone. Human forces were settling in for a long deployment, their trebuchets and ballistas standing like mechanical sentinels. The Kragthar kept their distance, nursing wounds and wounded pride. The Galactic Council was probably drafting new treaty language that would take years to finalize and still somehow miss something important. And somewhere on Earth, Renaissance fair enthusiasts, medieval combat practitioners, and trebuchet hobbyists were celebrating because finally, someone had recognized that their obsessive dedication to obsolete weapons wasn't weird, it was strategic. Jake raised his coffee mug in a toast. To humanity, the only species in the galaxy that keeps every weapon we've ever invented, just in case we need it someday. And to never underestimating a species that weaponizes nostalgia, Eva added. They clinked mugs and watched another practice shot from Dimitri's trebuchet sail into the evening sky. The stone traced a perfect arc before landing precisely on target 300 meters away. Somewhere in the universe, another alien species was probably writing a treaty with carefully worded restrictions, confident they'd outsmarted humanity. They'd learn, eventually. Everyone did. The hard way.